Jon Snow's psychological identity is built upon a foundational wound, the belief that he is illegitimate, unwanted, and fundamentally displaced within his own family. Growing up in Winterfell under the shadow of presumed bastardy, he internalizes the silent rejection embedded in social hierarchy. Though raised alongside the Stark children, he is constantly reminded that he does not fully belong. This early experience creates a deep identity fracture, where his sense of self is shaped more by absence than presence. Psychologically, this mirrors what identity theorists describe as a negative self-definition, in which the individual understands who they are primarily through what they are not. His decision to join the Night's Watch is not merely an act of honor. It is a search for structure. The Wall offers Jon something Winterfell could not, an identity stripped of lineage, where brothers are bound by oath rather than blood. In developmental terms, he seeks institutional belonging to compensate for emotional ambiguity. The Watch becomes both sanctuary and prison, offering clarity through rigid rules. This reflects a common psychological pattern. Individuals with unstable early belonging often gravitate toward highly structured systems that promise certainty. Jon's moral compass operates independently from social approval, indicating a strong internalized ethical framework. Unlike characters who chase power, Jon consistently chooses responsibility over recognition. His psychology reflects a post-conventional moral reasoning stage, where decisions are guided by universal principles rather than external reward. This explains why he repeatedly sacrifices personal safety and status. His identity is not built on ambition but on obligation. The tension between duty and desire is central to his identity formation. His love for Ygritte challenges his vows, forcing him to confront the emotional cost of rigid self-definition. Here, Jon's psychology enters a transitional phase. He must decide whether identity is defined by rules or relationships. His ultimate return to duty suggests that, at this stage, he equates loyalty with survival. Emotion is sacrificed for coherence. Resurrection intensifies his psychological fragmentation. After being betrayed and murdered by his own brothers, Jon experiences existential rupture. Symbolically and psychologically, death functions as ego dissolution. When he returns, he is less attached to institutional identity and more guided by existential clarity. Trauma transforms him. He no longer acts to prove himself. He acts because he understands impermanence. Leadership further complicates his self-concept. As king in the North, he embodies collective projection. The North sees him as a symbol, but Jon never fully internalizes that image. This dissonance between external role and internal doubt creates cognitive tension. He leads effectively, yet remains detached from the mythology forming around him. Psychologically, he resists narcissistic inflation. The revelation of his true parentage destabilizes his constructed identity once again. Learning that he is Aegon Targaryen challenges the narrative he built around himself. His previous self-concept, bastard-turned-leader, collapses under new information. Identity psychologists emphasize that late-life revelations can trigger regression or integration. Jon chooses integration, but reluctantly. He does not embrace grandeur. He resists it. His relationship with Daenerys becomes a psychological mirror. Both struggle with destiny. Yet while she leans into prophetic identity, Jon withdraws from it. This contrast highlights their divergent coping mechanisms. Daenerys externalizes purpose through conquest, whereas Jon internalizes purpose through restraint. His discomfort with power underscores his core fear, becoming what others expect rather than remaining authentic. Ultimately, Jon's killing of Daenerys is not political. It is psychological. It represents the triumph of ethical consistency over emotional attachment. He acts not out of hatred, but out of alignment with his moral structure. This decision reflects tragic individuation. He accepts isolation to preserve his values. Identity solidifies through loss. In exile beyond the Wall, Jon returns to liminality. He belongs neither to crown nor castle. Yet this state mirrors his earliest self, between worlds, undefined by title. The difference is integration. Unlike the boy who felt incomplete, the man beyond the Wall understands that identity is not inherited. It is chosen repeatedly through action. Jon Snow's dual heritage, son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, embodies a psychological synthesis of fire and ice. Yet he is unaware of this truth for most of his life. This delayed revelation reflects a core psychological concept. Identity often precedes knowledge. Jon lives according to Stark values, long before he understands his Targaryen blood. His behavior suggests that nurture has sculpted his moral architecture more profoundly than lineage. The Stark influence instills stoicism, loyalty, and restraint. These traits function as psychological anchors. Even when faced with chaos, Jon defaults to measured response. His temperament reveals secure internal regulation despite early rejection. This paradox, stable ethics formed within unstable belonging, demonstrates resilience. He constructs meaning through chosen loyalty rather than inherited privilege. Conversely, the latent Targaryen heritage introduces the theme of destiny. The Targaryens are historically associated with grandeur and volatility. Jon's psychology, however, resists volatility. Instead of embodying fire as domination, he expresses it as quiet endurance. This reinterpretation of inherited myth suggests adaptive individuation. He transforms what could be destructive legacy into disciplined strength. Jon's identity conflict becomes most visible in romantic attachment. With Daenerys, he is both nephew and lover, king and subordinate. These overlapping roles create internal dissonance. Psychologically, this mirrors role confusion, a state where social identities collide. Jon resolves this not by asserting dominance, but by withdrawing from claim. His sense of self cannot coexist with moral compromise. Throughout the series, isolation operates as both wound and refuge. Jon repeatedly stands apart, from the Starks, from the Watch, from the Northern Lords. Isolation sharpens introspection. It allows him to evaluate himself independently from collective noise. While many characters derive identity from external validation, Jon's emerges from solitude. Trust is another core element of his psychological structure. He extends trust cautiously but sincerely. His betrayal at the Wall deeply fractures this capacity, yet it does not erase it. Post-trauma, he becomes more discerning, not cynical. This indicates growth rather than regression. Trauma reshapes his boundaries without corrupting his values. Power consistently finds Jon, but he rarely seeks it. This dynamic suggests an internalized belief that worth is proven through sacrifice, not acquisition. Psychologically, this aligns with a service-oriented identity structure. He perceives leadership as burden rather than reward. This perception shields him from authoritarian impulses. When confronted with prophecy and destiny narratives, Jon remains skeptical. Unlike Daenerys, he does not interpret events as divine validation. This grounded perspective protects him from grandiosity. He understands the fragility of life too intimately to romanticize fate. His brush with death dismantles any illusion of invincibility. In the final stages of his arc, Jon's return beyond the Wall symbolizes regression in geography, but progression in psyche. He chooses an existence free from political myth. The Wildlands represent psychological authenticity, life stripped of titles and expectation. In this space, he can integrate all fragments of self without performance. Jon Snow's psychology ultimately reveals that identity is not fixed by blood, prophecy, or social label. It is forged in moral choice, refined through suffering, and stabilized through self-awareness. His journey illustrates that belonging is not found in crowns or castles, but in alignment between action and principle. Through fragmentation and integration, he becomes whole not by claiming power, but by relinquishing it.